Barry Gibb's name is known around the world, but there's a side to his story that few truly understand. Fame, success, and global hits were only part of the journey. What happened behind the scenes was something far more personal and heartbreaking. There's a reason he's known today as the last surviving BG. Join us as we uncover the untold story of Barry Gibb's heartbreaking life. Early life and origins. Barry Gibb was born on September 1, 1946, on the Isle of Man, a small island in the Irish Sea between England and Ireland. His parents were Barbara and Hugh Gibb. Barry was their second child. Before long, his younger twin brothers, Robin and Maurice, were born on December 22, 1949. Later, the family welcomed two more siblings, a sister named Leslie and a younger brother, Andy, who would also grow up to be a singer. The Gibb household was full of music, and it played a major role in shaping Barry's early life. Their father, Hugh Gibb, was a drummer and band leader. He had worked in local dance halls and clubs, and he loved music deeply. He passed that love on to his children. Music was always around the house. Barry and his brothers grew up listening to their father's records and watching him rehearse and perform. Hugh encouraged their interest and saw potential in their voices and natural harmony when they sang together. Barry, being the oldest of the brothers, was especially drawn to songwriting and often took the lead. In the early 1950s, the Gibb family moved from the Isle of Man to Manchester, England. Life in post-war Manchester was tough, and the family didn't have much money. But it was in Manchester that Barry, Robin, and Maurice first began performing publicly. As young boys, they would sing together at local movie theaters before the films started. People quickly noticed that these three young boys had talent. In 1955, Barry formed a music group with Maurice and Robin called the Rattlesnakes. Barry was only 9 years old at the time. They played skiffle and early rock and roll music, which was popular in Britain at the time. They performed at school events and local talent shows. Though they were still just kids, they took music seriously and practiced regularly. By the late 1950s, Barry's parents realized that if their sons were going to have a real shot at a music career, they would need better opportunities. In 1958, the entire Gibb family packed up and moved to Redcliffe, a suburb of Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. This was a major turning point for Barry and his brothers. They were only children, but they already had big dreams, and now they were in a new country where anything seemed possible. Things were about to change fast for the Gibb brothers, and for Barry, it was just the beginning of something huge. The rise of the Bee Gees. By the early 1960s, Barry Gibb and his younger twin brothers, Maurice and Robin, were living in Australia with their family. After moving there in 1958, they started performing together more seriously. They began calling themselves the Bee Gees, a name that stood for Brothers Gibb. It was a simple name, but one that would soon become famous around the world. Between 1960 and 1963, the Bee Gees started to make a name for themselves in Australia. They sang on local radio shows and performed on early Australian television programs. The brothers were still teenagers, but they stood out because of their close harmonies and original songs, most of which were written by Barry. People in Australia started noticing their talent, especially how mature their music sounded for such young performers. In 1963, they signed a recording contract with Leedon Records, a label that was part of Festival Records, one of the main record companies in Australia at the time. Over the next few years, they released several singles, including The Battle of the Blue and the Grey and 3 Kisses of Love. These songs were mostly popular in local areas, and while a few made it onto the Australian music charts, they didn't become major hits. Even though they worked hard and kept releasing music, success was slow to come. The Bee Gees stayed busy performing on TV and touring around Australia, but by the mid-1960s, it became clear that they had bigger dreams. They wanted to break into the international music scene, especially in the UK and the United States, where most of the world's biggest stars were. Their parents agreed. In early 1967, the Gibb family made the decision to return to England, hoping that this move would help the Bee Gees reach a much wider audience. When they arrived back in England, things started to move quickly. They sent a demo tape of their songs to a man named Robert Stigwood, who was a powerful figure in the British music industry. Stigwood heard something special in the brothers' voices and songwriting. He immediately signed them to his label and began managing their careers. From 1967 to 1969, the Bee Gees enjoyed a fast and exciting rise to stardom. They released several hit songs during this period that are still loved today. "To Love Somebody" became one of their most famous ballads, covered by many other artists later. Massachusetts hit #1 in the UK, and Words became another worldwide favorite. Their success wasn't just limited to singing. Barry was now gaining recognition as a skilled songwriter, not only for the Bee Gees, but also for other artists. As their fame grew, so did the pressure. Behind the scenes, things weren't always smooth between the brothers. Robin started to feel that Barry was being pushed too far into the spotlight, especially by their manager, Robert Stigwood. Barry had become the main songwriter and lead vocalist on many tracks, and this made Robin feel left out. The tension between Barry and Robin began to affect their music and performances. By 1969, things came to a breaking point. Robin decided to leave the group after disagreements over the single "First of May," where Barry was the main singer. Robin believed one of his songs, "Lamplight," should have been the A-side instead. After that, he announced he was going solo. Barry and Morris continued for a while as a duo, and Barry even considered starting his own solo career. During this time, both Barry and Robin worked on solo projects. Robin released a solo album, Robin's Reign, and Barry began writing songs on his own. But even though they were apart, none of them found the same level of success on their own as they did together. It became clear that the special magic of the Bee Gees came from all three brothers working as one. Their breakup didn't last long. Deep down, the brothers still cared for each other, and they knew they were stronger as a group. But before their reunion, Barry would have to go through more changes, both in music and in life. Something totally new was coming next, and it would take the Bee Gees in a direction no one expected. After their temporary breakup in 1969, the Gibb brothers realized that they were better together than apart. They missed the bond they had, both personally and musically. So in 1970, Barry, Robin, and Maurice reunited as the Bee Gees. This was a turning point in their careers. Their reunion led to the release of a new album called 2 Years On. The album featured the emotional ballad Lonely Days, which quickly became a hit in the United States. It reached #3 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. This song showed fans that the Bee Gees were back, and their signature harmonies were stronger than ever. The song also marked a new kind of sound, more soulful, more mature. That new direction came around 1975, when the Bee Gees made a big move, both in location and in sound. They relocated to Miami, Florida, a city that had a lively and growing music scene. There they started working with producer Arif Mardin, who had worked with soul and R&B artists. Under his guidance, the Bee Gees began to shift away from soft rock and ballads and toward rhythm and blues, funk, and dance music. After Arif Mardin, the Bee Gees started working with two young producers, Albie Galutin and Carl Richardson. This new team helped refine the Bee Gees' disco sound even more. Barry also began experimenting with his falsetto voice, which would soon become a trademark part of the Bee Gees' music. Then, in 1977, everything changed with the release of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. The film, starring John Travolta, became a worldwide sensation, but it was the music that truly defined it. The Bee Gees wrote and performed most of the songs for the soundtrack, including Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, How Deep Is Your Love, and More Than a Woman. By the end of the decade, the Bee Gees were riding higher than ever. But with all that fame came new pressures and challenges, some of which would begin to take a toll very soon. And just when they thought they were on top of the world, the backlash was about to hit. Disco Demolition Night. By the start of the 1980s, the Bee Gees were still one of the most famous music groups in the world. But things were starting to change fast, and not for the better. The very thing that had made them global superstars, disco music, was now turning into something people wanted to leave behind. The disco era was coming to an end, and the backlash hit the Bee Gees hard. One of the most famous moments of this backlash happened on July 12, 1979. It was called Disco Demolition Night. A Chicago radio DJ invited people to a baseball stadium with the promise that they could blow up disco records. The crowd grew wild, and things got out of control. People rushed the field, and the game had to be canceled. While it may have seemed like a strange event, it symbolized something bigger, a cultural shift. Disco was no longer cool, and the Bee Gees, as the face of disco, became the main target. From 1980 to 1983, the Bee Gees' career dropped quickly in the U.S. Many radio stations refused to play their songs. Some even had strict policies banning disco music altogether. Even though the Bee Gees tried to move toward a more pop and rock sound, they couldn't escape the image of being a disco band. Their albums during this time, such as Living Eyes, didn't perform well in the U.S., even though they were still popular in parts of Europe and Australia. With the band struggling, Barry Gibb focused more on writing and producing music for other artists. Behind the scenes, he was still in demand. He co-wrote and produced many successful songs for other stars. In 1980, he worked with Barbra Streisand on her album Guilty. It became a huge hit, and the song Woman in Love, which Barry co-wrote, reached #1 in several countries. He also helped write and produce for artists like Dionne Warwick, Kenny Rogers, and Diana Ross. These songs kept Barry's name on the charts, even if the Bee Gees themselves weren't getting the same attention. Andy Gibb and addiction. While Barry was busy behind the scenes, another part of his life was becoming more difficult: his relationship with his younger brother, Andy Gibb. Andy had followed in the footsteps of his older brothers and become a singer too. In the late 1970s, Andy had several big hits of his own, including I Just Wanna Be Your Everything and Shadow Dancing. He was young, handsome, and talented. For a while, he looked like he would be just as successful as the Bee Gees, maybe even more. But Andy was also dealing with serious personal problems. He struggled with drug addiction, especially cocaine. His drug use began to affect his voice, his performances, and his health. Andy lost jobs, canceled concerts, and started to distance himself from the people trying to help him. His record label dropped him, and his career began to fall apart. Barry never gave up on his little brother. He tried many times to help Andy get clean. Barry supported him emotionally and financially. He brought Andy into the studio and encouraged him to record again. The Bee Gees even planned to have Andy join the group in the mid-1980s, hoping that music would help him recover. But no matter how hard Barry tried, Andy couldn't stay sober for long. In early 1988, Andy checked into a hospital in England. He was only 30 years old, but years of drug abuse had taken a heavy toll on his body. On March 10, 1988, Andy Gibb died of myocarditis, a condition that causes inflammation of the heart. Doctors said the illness was made worse by years of substance abuse, even though Andy hadn't used drugs in the final months of his life. Andy's death crushed Barry. He had not only lost a brother, but also someone he had tried so hard to save. In interviews later, Barry admitted that Andy's death left him feeling helpless and heartbroken. The loss stayed with him for the rest of his life. Barry often said that he wished he could have done more, even though he had done everything he could. The 1980s were a painful time for Barry Gibb. His fame had faded from the spotlight, and he was dealing with both professional challenges and deep personal grief. The Bee Gees, though still writing and recording, were no longer the center of the music world. But behind the scenes, Barry's songwriting talent remained strong. Even in hard times, he continued to create music that touched people. But the story didn't end there. After losing so much, Barry and his brothers were about to make an unexpected return. The death of Maurice Gibb. After a tough decade in the 1980s, the Bee Gees began to slowly find their place again in the music world during the 1990s. While they never returned to the extreme level of fame they had during the Saturday Night Fever era, they still had a loyal fan base and were respected for their decades of work. In 1989, they released the album One, which helped mark their return. The title track, One, became a modest hit in the US, and the album did well in Europe. This album was special in another way, too. It was the first the brothers recorded after the death of their younger brother Andy in 1988. They dedicated the album to him. The music had a more mature and reflective tone, showing how much they had gone through as a family. In 1997, the Bee Gees received one of the highest honors in the music world. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. During the ceremony, Barry, Maurice, and Robin stood together on stage and looked back on a career that had lasted for decades. It was a proud moment, especially for Barry, who had led the group from its earliest days. Their harmonies, songwriting, and ability to reinvent themselves over time were finally being recognized by the broader music community. Around this time, the Bee Gees also experienced strong success touring around the world. They performed sold-out shows in Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia. While the US music scene had mostly moved on from their style, many international fans continued to support them. The brothers, especially Barry, were proud that their music still meant so much to so many people. But behind all the success, life was not easy. The brothers had experienced loss, pressure, and the weight of being in the spotlight for decades. Still, they stayed close and continued working together as best they could. Then, in January 2003, tragedy struck again. Maurice Gibb, Barry's twin brother and lifelong bandmate, suddenly fell ill and was rushed to the hospital in Florida. He had suffered a twisted intestine and underwent emergency surgery. At first, the family hoped he would recover, but complications developed quickly. Maurice went into cardiac arrest during surgery and died on January 12, 2003, at the age of 53. The news of Maurice's death shocked fans around the world, but for Barry, it was absolutely devastating. Maurice had been Barry's musical partner for nearly his entire life. While Robin had sometimes clashed with Barry over leadership in the group, Maurice had always played the peacemaker. Barry later described Maurice as his anchor, the one who kept everything steady. His death left a huge hole in Barry's life, personally and professionally. Barry was deeply affected. In interviews after Maurice's death, he said that he couldn't imagine continuing the Bee Gees without him. Even though Robin was still alive and willing to carry on, Barry felt that the magic of the group had been lost. The bond between the three brothers was at the heart of everything they did, and without Maurice, it didn't feel the same. Because of this, Barry and Robin quietly agreed to retire the Bee Gees' name. It was a painful decision, but one they both felt was necessary. They still appeared together a few times, and even talked about doing projects under their own names, but the era of the Bee Gees had come to an end. Barry had lost not just his brother, but also the group that had defined his entire life. Even through heartbreak, Barry continued to write and make music. But the 2000s would only bring more grief and more change and even more loss. Things weren't done falling apart just yet. Robin's illness and death. Just a few years after losing Maurice, the Gibb family faced another devastating challenge. In 2008, Robin Gibb was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. At first, he kept the news private, but over time, his health struggles became more visible. The diagnosis came as a shock, not only to the public, but also to Barry, who had already lost two brothers. Robin fought hard. For several years, he went through different treatments, including chemotherapy and surgeries. There were moments when it seemed like he might recover. His cancer went into remission more than once, and Robin continued to make public appearances and work on music. But even during those better periods, his body was clearly weakened. He had lost a lot of weight, and he looked tired, but he stayed determined to keep going. During this time, something important happened between Barry and Robin. After years of ups and downs, including past disagreements about the direction of the band, the two brothers became closer again. Their shared losses had brought them together. With Maurice and Andy gone, they were the only two left, and they both knew how important their bond was. They spent more time together and even returned to the stage as a duo. In 2010 and 2011, Barry and Robin performed a few times at charity events and special shows. These appearances gave fans hope that there might be some form of a Bee Gees comeback. Despite Robin's fragile health, the brothers sounded strong when they sang together. For a brief moment, it felt like a new chapter might be starting. But Robin's condition slowly worsened. By late 2011, he was noticeably frail during interviews and concerts. He struggled with his speech and often appeared very weak. In early 2012, his health declined sharply. He was admitted to the hospital and, for a time, fell into a coma. Fans around the world held their breath, hoping for a miracle. Barry stayed by his brother's side and continued to hope for a recovery. That miracle never came. On May 20, 2012, Robin Gibb passed away at the age of 62. The news broke hearts everywhere, but none more than Barry's. With Robin gone, Barry was now the last living Gibb brother. He had outlived Andy, Maurice, and now Robin, all of whom he had shared his life and music with. The weight of that reality hit him hard. At Robin's funeral, Barry gave a heartfelt speech. He talked about their childhood, their careers, and their bond as brothers. He said he felt lost without them, and admitted to feeling a deep sorrow and even guilt. In later interviews, Barry often said that he wondered why he had survived while all his brothers had passed. He spoke openly about the pain of watching them die one by one, and how it haunted him. During musical tributes and memorial concerts, Barry sometimes broke down in tears. Singing alone on stage, performing the songs they had once sung together, was almost too much. At one event, he said he could still hear their voices in his head when he performed. He felt like they were still with him, but the loneliness was overwhelming. Robin's death wasn't just the loss of a brother. It was the final end of the Bee Gees as a group. The voices, harmonies, and connection that made them unique couldn't be recreated. Barry was left to carry the legacy alone, and it was a heavy burden. Even though millions of fans still loved their music, the heart of it had changed forever. Still, Barry didn't give up on music. It was too deeply a part of who he was. But everything from this point on would be different. And with nothing left but memories, Barry had to figure out who he was without them. Barry Gibb, after the Bee Gees. After losing all three of his brothers, Andy, Maurice, and Robin, Barry Gibb entered a deeply emotional period of his life. For the first time, he was completely alone as a Gibb brother. The Bee Gees, a group that had been at the center of his life since childhood, was no more. The silence that followed was heavy and, in many ways, heartbreaking. In the years that followed Robin's death in 2012, Barry began to speak openly about his grief. In interviews, he admitted that the losses had left a deep mark on him. He talked about survivor's guilt, the painful feeling of wondering why he was the only one left. In one especially emotional interview, he said, "Sometimes I wish it had been me instead of them." These weren't just passing thoughts. Barry was clearly still working through the sadness and the sense of helplessness he had carried for decades. Still, despite the grief, Barry turned once again to music. It was what he had always done during hard times. In 2016, he released a solo album titled In the Now. It was his first album of entirely new material since the Bee Gees had stopped recording. The songs were deeply personal and reflective, many of them inspired by the lives and deaths of his brothers. The album showed that Barry hadn't lost his gift for melody or songwriting. While it didn't top the charts like his earlier work, In the Now was praised for its honesty and depth. That same year, Barry made a surprising and emotional appearance at the Glastonbury Festival in England. He performed alongside Coldplay, singing Bee Gees classics like To Love Somebody and Stayin' Alive. It was a powerful moment, Barry standing alone on stage, yet backed by a new generation of musicians who had grown up with his songs. It reminded everyone that his music had truly become timeless. In 2021, Barry released another special project, Greenfields, the Gibb Brothers Songbook, Volume 1. This album featured country-inspired reworkings of classic Bee Gees songs, sung as duets with artists like Dolly Parton, Keith Urban, and Alison Krauss. The idea came from Barry's longtime love of country music. But more than that, it was a way to honor the songs he had written with Maurice and Robin, giving them new life in a fresh style. Alongside his music, Barry continued to speak publicly about his family. The 2020 HBO documentary, The Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, gave him the chance to tell the full story. In the film, Barry opened up like never before. He cried as he talked about losing his brothers. He shared personal stories, looked back on their fights and their love, and gave insight into what it was like to carry their memory forward alone. The documentary introduced the Bee Gees to a new generation and reminded older fans just how special their journey had been. In 2018, Barry was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. He became Sir Barry Gibb, a formal recognition of his huge contribution to music. While it was a great honor, Barry admitted it was bittersweet. He said he wished his brothers had been there to share it with him. For Barry, every award and achievement carried the shadow of those who were no longer there to witness it. As of 2025, Barry lives a quiet life in Miami with his wife, Linda, whom he married in 1970. They have 5 children and several grandchildren. Barry has mostly stepped away from the spotlight. He occasionally makes public appearances, attends tributes, or performs at special events, but he spends most of his time with family. People close to him say he is still mourning his brothers and talks about them often. Barry Gibb's life has been full of both triumph and tragedy. He's known the heights of global fame and the deepest kind of personal loss. Through it all, he's kept going, writing, singing, and remembering. And even now, there's still one more part of his story worth telling. If you found this story moving, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more videos on the lives behind the legends.